This lecture covers a most intricate and important topic, drafting legal descriptions. So let's start by looking at the purpose of a legal description. Black's Law Dictionary describes a legal description as a description of real property by metes and bounds or lot numbers of a recorded plat and so forth. Such must be complete enough that a particular parcel of land can be located and identified. So the purpose of a legal description in the present era is really no different than it has ever been. The purpose is to adequately and fully describe a particular parcel of land with such sufficiency that there is no question as to the location and the boundaries thereof. The legal description survives sales contracts, real estate closings, corporate resolutions, foreclosures, tax sales, although tax sales might be arguably different at times, divorces, refinancing, and so forth. It is the stock certificate of the real property being transacted. Just like you don't own the stock, you own the stock in a corporation. You don't go to the corporation and look at the machines and the warehouses and the trucks. Your stock certificate says that you own one share of stock in that company. If you can't go to the property, stay on it, live on it, never leave it, your title, the legal description, describes it. It's kind of metaphorically the same as a stock certificate. So it has to be rock solid. As we talked about in interpreting legal descriptions, the styles and the formats have evolved over the years. There are stylistic changes, stylistic preferences, and so forth. Certain imperfections can invalidate a legal description or a sales transaction or a closing transaction or sales contract, such as a blown point of beginning or other things like the wrong landlord or the wrong county can even nullify a legal description. But a mere inaccuracy, according to the law, according to some case law, will not in itself void a legal description. So you can have a typo, you can have something that's easily resolved, maybe a reversed call that doesn't mathematically close without it, things that can be supported or answered by evidence on a survey plat that will not void it, which would leave somebody without a piece of property in a huge title gap. So the law tries not, or the court and the law tries really hard not to invalidate a legal description and send you back to the starting point. But there are situations where it can be, description has been ruled in the courts to be invalid or insufficient or even void. So that creates a lot of problems. So the moral of the story is make sure the legal description is precise, accurate, complete, and airtight. So metes and bounds description is giving someone, usually a retracing surveyor in the future, explicit directions on how to get to and get around the property that you're describing. Commit this to memory. A legal description is a journey like a road trip. It's just smaller and much more detailed. Call it a journey like a road trip. Think about that. So Georgia Board Rule does have a rule on legal descriptions. Now, read this in the material. It gives detailed instructions on what should be included and so forth. And we're going to look at a yellow highlighted section and a green highlighted section. That becomes very important. And I'm going to tell you that a lot of registered surveyors and title attorneys struggle with understanding this and disagree with this and create issues with these two points, the yellow and the green. If y'all get it right, you'll be a step ahead. You may be the smartest man or woman in your company after this, at least when it comes to surveying descriptions. That's a little humor involved. So the yellow highlight says the description shall include the names of adjoining subdivision and or property owners on all lines. Okay, think about that. But first, let's skip to green. All descriptions, being a form of report, shall bear the land surveyor's name, address, seal, and signature. So this board rule is giving specific instructions on when a land surveyor prepares a legal description that's going to be issued as a standalone product, as a work product, a report. It's a Lone Ranger. It is a deliverable. And when we do that, which honestly in my career I've done very few times, I think 3 times, and one of those was in Tennessee, where the survey was not really sought after. It was a written description that was stamped and sealed by a land surveyor. Now, that don't really make a lot of sense to me because a picture is worth 1,000 words. But this rule applies only to descriptions that are issued as a standalone work product, like a report, like a letter. It's going to have letterhead, or at least the company name and info, the address, the surveyor's name, and a seal and signature, just like it is some other deliverable, like an elevation certificate or an alcohol survey or an affidavit. So understand that there is a difference there. Consider the situation where the land surveyor goes out and does some topography or some utility locate or both, and we send a CAD file to an engineer. The engineer takes the data in that CAD file and builds his or her engineering plans off of it. He cites the source of the survey data, the water line, gas line locations, blah, 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 from survey by XYZ surveyors. Great. We never actually issued a drawing with a border on it and a stamp and a north arrow that says topographic survey. In that type of situation, we are providing raw electronic data that is easily used by the next professional down the road. Now, the reason I bring this up is most legal descriptions that we draft are used one of 2 ways. And again, I'll say 99.9% of our legal descriptions that we'll draft, such as we will craft in this course, are used in one of 2 ways. They either go on the face of the plat, or they are sent in Word doc format to an attorney or a lender, or some similar word processor document to some other person in the transaction. So let's look at that. If we put it on our plat, it needs to comply with the rule. Our plat complies with the rule in that the names of the adjacent subdivisions and adjacent owners are on our plat if they meet the Plat Act and the board rules, which they should. So we can still take the same legal description that we're preparing, stick it on the face of the plat, and boom, there it is. I personally see very little reason to put legal descriptions on the face of a plat, but that's a topic for another day. The majority of the legal descriptions that we as land surveyors prepare and send away as a service to our client are in a Word document. And some attorney, lender, abstractor, bond processor, something is going to take that legal description and put it in their documents, in the warranty deed, the quitclaim deed, the security deed, the corporate resolution, the bond indenture, whatever it is. It's just like the CAD file that we send an engineer. It's an electronic work product prepared to help them do theirs. We really don't have any responsibility for it once we send it away, because they can edit it. They can take out things they don't like. They can add things that they want. But it goes into their documents, not our plat that bears our stamp and signature. Please understand this. If you didn't, rewind it, watch it again. If you still don't, shoot me an email. It's important to understand the difference. The legal descriptions that we turn out, we will not include the adjoining owners' names for a reason that we will discuss. We do include legal boundaries like land lot lines, highway right-of-ways, things like that, or a riparian boundary. So we might say along the north right-of-way of Highway 101 to the center line of Nickajack Creek, thence northerly along Nickajack Creek to the north line of land lot 273, thence east to an iron pin, thence a southerly direction to concrete right-of-way monument in the point of beginning, that those calls adjoined either the state of Georgia on the highway right of way, John Doe, Bill Smith, Nancy, whoever, but we don't put those adjoiners' names in there for a reason that we'll cover. Again, if you're putting that out as a standalone legal description as a report or document, it's going to be stamped and sealed and prepared like a report or an affidavit. The board rule requires that you put the adjoining names on there. That is to make the legal description the most complete picture of the plat possible in words. If you're not doing that, you're not bound by the rule. More comments on the board rule. We just talked about this. The board rule does not apply to editable word or text documents provided to clients. If the legal description is issued as a standalone work product, which is very rare, it must include all of that. The inclusion of names have detrimental legal, the inclusion of names of adjacent owners can have detrimental legal consequences, and so it is not recommended for descriptions that are provided to others or put on the face of the plat, or such as an editable Word document. It's also important to note that most states do not regulate the content of legal descriptions. It's kind of left alone, or it's very territorially guarded as work product strictly for attorneys. But Georgia does have a rule on legal descriptions. So the comment on the inclusion of adjacent owners. We've talked about in the construction of legal description, the hierarchy of controlling boundary elements, etc. Bearings and distances yield to the actual object. If it says 400 feet to an iron pin, you go 399 feet and you find an iron pin that checks out to be called for, undisturbed, and matching the description. Okay, it's no longer 400, it's now 399. The bearing and distance yielded. Maybe you rotate the bearings change, that's fine. The concrete right-of-way monument is still the corner. It's like the pork chop on a plate. The food never moves, just the bearing and the orientation along it. The courts in several states, we're studying mostly Georgia here, Colburn versus McKee in 1998, there was two adjacent owners who had a common boundary. One legal description called specifically for a ditch, the other called for a straight line. The ditch was crooked, so it was not one and the same. It became clouded as to which one was senior, which would have been a nice way to resolve it. But the one that called for a straight line did not want it to be a ditch because that affected their property and their boat dock in a big bad way. But their deed said north so many degrees in feet along the line of McGee or McGee's predecessor. The court ruled that the call for McGee as an adjoiner and to call for along McGee's property made McGee's property description superior, just like a call for a tree, concrete monument, or a creek. Whatever that object is, that controls, regardless of the bearing and distance. So the court rejected the bearing and distance in the deed and said that it followed the ditch because that was McGee's boundary, even though their deed called for a straight line in reference to survey. The area between the ditch and the straight line became disputed. The ditch won because one neighbor's description said straight line, bearing a distance, but along the neighbor's property line. And that citation of the neighboring property line coming in was held to be superior control and rejected the straight line that was called for in the deed. So we don't want to become involved in that. We don't want to interject things in our legal descriptions that we prepare that conflict, because you've got an iron pin to iron pin. Say they're both in the middle of a ditch. The ditch veers out 20 feet to the east. If the straight line is the line, then say the line is. And if the neighboring property calls for the ditch, you need to show the overlap But be very careful not to say fence along the neighbor's property, because then you just invalidated your own bearing and distance and included the neighbor's description as a controlling hierarchy in the boundary, just like a natural object. So the court specifically said, we'll quote this and move on, when the lines or courses of an adjoining tract are called for in a deed or grant, the lines shall be extended to them without regard to distances, provided these lines and courses are sufficiently established. And the ditch was deemed to be in a sufficiently established boundary. So don't include adjoining property owners' names or deed references in your legal descriptions. Now, from a surveying standpoint, we have some terms, we have a point, we have to realize where we're beginning. Point of reference is what the board rule calls for, because the board rules wrote for surveyors. This can also be the point of beginning or point of commencement. Board Rule 180-7-.07 D1 under maps and plats says that we are to provide the distance and direction from a point of reference to a point on the boundary of the individual survey, and such additional data as may be required to relocate the boundary point from the point of reference with the same degree of accuracy required of the parcel surveyed. So if we got a 0.25 positional tolerance on our suburban boundary, we can't say plus or minus a quarter mile to Highway 1, or plus or minus 399 feet to the north line of land lot so-and-so. It needs to be measured with the same precision as the survey. The point of reference shall be an established monumented position, so it has to be a physical point on the ground that you can go touch, which can be identified or relocated from maps, plats, or other documents on public record, including state plane coordinates when applicable. We'll come back to that. The point of reference may lie on or within the boundary of the survey. So if your property boundary starts at a named street intersection or a landlocked corner, you've got it. It's already there. The survey has to contain a point of reference. Now, this is applicable to all surveys. It may be subdividing a lot, subdividing a tract into subdivision, maybe retracing a tract. So each plat has to have an adequate point of reference to be a valid survey and not be in violation there. It can't just randomly be an iron pin in the woods. It can't just be beginning at an iron pin on the east side of Huckleberry Road. I saw a lot of descriptions like that. It's ambiguous. It doesn't count. Where is it? We don't know. All we know is it's on the east side of Huckleberry Road. Huckleberry Road's 7 miles long. Where is it? We don't know. We have an ambiguous point of beginning and an inadequate point of reference. We have a legal problem at that point. So we have to be able to locate it with certainty later, and there has to be other supporting documents out there, maps and plats or other documents on public record where we can go back to it. A landlocked corner, certainly something like that. The intersection of a named road and a named stream. Sounds good. I would even use the top center of the bridge or the culvert just as a precise point. But it has to be somewhere that you can go to maps and public information and find a point of reference for the survey and then get to or begin the traverse around the property. So this rule applies directly to maps and plats, and it is the authoritative guidance on what the beginning point is for a legal description. Actually, that should say this is not the authoritative guidance on what the beginning point is. Surveyors must look merely beyond satisfying the board rule with an established monumented position and correlate the survey to the record titled point of beginning. right, so I said we'd come back to it. State plane coordinates are not on their own a tie. They are not on their own a valid point of reference. A lot of surveyors seem to think they are, and I understand why they think they are, because they are grounded in, the geodetic definition of the earth. Theoretically, you can go find monuments with geodetic positions reported through the National Geodetic Survey and go to the state plane coordinates, or GPS obviously, but you can go outside the property to extrinsic sources and using geodetic surveying establish state plane coordinates and come back to the state plane coordinates where your survey began. That's all fine and good. That can help, but that's not what the board rule and the law requires. It requires an established monumented position that can be relocated with maps and plats and other documents on public record. State plane coordinates do not meet that definition. They don't really even come all that close to meeting that definition. It's not a bad idea to include them, but they're not on their own valid. So the whole reason that state plane coordinates are even mentioned in that board rule, I drafted that language when I sit on the state board so I can speak to it, is the state board was looking to make the tie measurements point of beginning a lot stricter, so that, because in rural southeast Georgia, no land lots, you have timber tracts that are thousands of acres laying next to each other. I mean, there are counties, huge counties, bigger than Gwinnett County in southeast Georgia in land mass, that don't have 10,000 people living in. Huge tracts of land just growing trees. Some may be growing crops. And so named roads are not all that common. You might have a county road. Very rarely do you have a state or a federal highway. You might have a named creek that meanders through the woods, but it might even be swampy. So these rural southeast Georgia surveyors brought up a very good point. What are they supposed to do? Go survey 700 acres for somebody, or 3,000 acres, but say it's going to cost you that much because we've got to survey 11 miles back to town to find a monumented established position? Well, the reality is those timber tracts usually have painted lines, timber breaks, maybe even old fences that lead from one to the other, and they are usually very well monumented. It's usually big old pipes and concrete, or some axles or concrete monuments, depending on where you are. So there normally no question about it, but how do you describe it? Well, especially if, say, 3 tracks come together at a big 3-inch open top pipe, and they're all 1,000 acres or more, owned by 3 different timber companies. So you got Weyerhaeuser, Georgia Pacific, and Bowater. They all 3 come together, this accepted, rock solid, 3-inch pipe full of concrete in a rock pile. No question. Everybody's happy. That should be a great point of reference. But how do you describe it? Well, you describe it as 3-inch open top pipe found with concrete in rock pile at the southwest corner of the Bowater tract described in deed book so-and-so. That's not bringing owners' names in as a controlling hierarchy along a line. That's just being used to identify that position. But there might be more than one 3-inch pipe in the ground, or maybe there are. It's a kind of a curved looking boundary, and it's kind of hard to describe which one it is. State plane coordinates put that mystery to bed. It's the one that's really close to those state plane coordinates. It's also good, granted, if that big 3-inch pipe gets torn out by a bulldozer during trying to fight a fire, or a skidder that got a little rogue and tore it out during a timber operation. State plane coordinates can be a last resort to put a point back in the ground if there was nothing better to go by. But again, you don't find state plane coordinates in a 1975 legal description. And even if you did, there's problems with that, which we'll speak to. So state plane coordinates on their own are not good enough, but it's okay to include them. Do not get trapped into saying just pick a coordinate out of your CAD file. There's your point of beginning, the state plane coordinates, blah, blah, blah. All right, now there are times some state or federal agencies may require state plane coordinates. Some counties may require state plane coordinates on tract being subdivided somehow. State plane coordinates are great for surveyors, but they usually have very little value to the title attorney. And that's in bold in your material, and here's why. Like I said, you don't find it in an old legal description. None of the legal descriptions that we've looked for say, oh, beginning at these state plane coordinates. So the title attorney has to be able to look at our survey and our legal description and the title of the property and go, yes, there it is. It is unquestionably located right there. It's the same parcel of land. High fives to everybody. Passing thought on state plane coordinates. When you do include them, if you ever include them, I have about twice. It was by request of the client, who was an engineer working for a construction company. State plane coordinates should include the state, the zone, and the projection. So for example, say Georgia state plane coordinates, west zone, North American datum of 1983, or the acronym we use, NAD 83. The state and the zone should be given. The projection is very important to note. Projections are the geodetic formulas used to convert geospatial coordinates, geodetic data, to latitude and longitude. And then from latitude and longitude, we convert them to state plane coordinates. So each projection uses a different and improved values. So we had the Clark's spheroid of in the 1800s. Then in 1927, we adopted a new one, the 1927 North American datum. 1983, they retweaked those formulas again, and we have the North American datum of 1983. Now, in 2025, we're going to get a brand new set of values that are going to supplant the 1983 values. So you can use these formulas and convert coordinates from Clark's 1800 spheroid to 27 to 83, probably to 25, but you got to know where you're at. So you got to know which ones are which. So be mindful of that. Now, in legal descriptions, point of reference, point of beginning, point of commencement, they come back in a different context. So point of reference has to meet the survey requirements. It's either going to be a point of beginning or a point of commencement when it comes to legal descriptions. So as we just covered in interpreting legal descriptions, if a good point of reference lies on the property's boundary, that can be the point of beginning. Poof, no further qualification needed. If the property has measurements or a tie out to a point of reference, then the point of reference becomes a point of commencement. And then you measure from there to the first property corner you come to where the tie originates, and that's your point of beginning. It's that simple. So we talked earlier about the different types of descriptions. We're only talking now about a meets and bounds description. That's the industry standard. That's all that surveyors prepare nowadays. So there are the elements of a description. Typically will have a title to explain to others what it is. You don't just start talking, hey, beginning at an iron pen, blah, blah, blah. No, you got to have a title. At least that makes a professional work product. Have a location caption, which should include the county. And if it's located within the limits of a city or a town. If it's in Georgia, the landlocked district and section, or the Georgia Militia District. In other states, you'll have other qualifying geographical limitations. And in public land survey states, you'll have the whole different caption about, section, township, and range. Then you have the guts, the actual description of the property, the bearings, the distances, the iron pins, etc. Then you conclude with footnotes that reference to the survey it was drawn from. It'll recite area and acreage and or square feet and any other conditions like something's been sold off, so that's less than accept, or there's an easement running through it. Maybe for whatever reason it says subject to this easement. although that's normally a title element. It's not included in a typical survey description that we prepare. Code section 44533 from the Georgia Code says that no prescribed form is essential to the validity of a deed to lands or personalty. If the deed is sufficient in itself to make known the transaction between the parties, no want of form will invalidate it. So this means that if the legal description can be used to adequately locate the property, it's legal. Legal description. So we're talking about drafting descriptions. We just went through those parts. Rules of grammar usually exist, although not rigidly. It should be written in legible, clear, and common fonts. Don't use fancy fonts that you can't read too well or that don't reproduce well when they get printed, scanned, pixelized, printed, scanned, and pixelized again. The detailed instructions on how to get around a piece of property must be concise enough and hard to misunderstand, or to be, you don't want to be able to misinterpret what it means. So, and also, as with any important document, it's a good idea to have someone else review the description. I'd have somebody else review any tricky description that I prepare, and we commonly in my office review descriptions versus plats with other people because it's easy to not see the forest for the trees. And I'd say for your assignment, if you want to have someone that you have some experience with review and critique your legal description, that's fine. Get it, to help get it right, but make sure that they just point out what you've done wrong and let you fix it and take it back to them. Don't just let them rewrite it for you. So the title, legal description, is the industry term. I personally prefer property description. I just don't really like the word legal being on anything that I turn out and put my stamp on or put my name behind. Just because I've been on the stand many times, and attorneys will try to trip a surveyor up by accusing him of practicing law without a license. So I don't really mind if we call them legal descriptions. I just like to, just because I'm a little nerdy about that. Land surveyors are attorneys and do not create legal documents, and they will let you know about that. So the description is only part of the actual legal document. So it's totally permissible for land surveyors to create descriptions. The word legal can make some feel uncomfortable. Some guidelines that I use is if it's being drawn from a new survey, I call it an as-surveyed property description, with the word property being substituted for the word legal. And if you're drawing a legal description from an older survey or a compiled drawing or something that you don't really want to reference, just call it property description. That works. So then the location caption is going to have what we were talking about: landlocked district, Georgia militia district if it's necessary, etc. So you just want to make sure that you put it where it is. This is what sets it. This is part of what sets the legal description apart from stock certificates, automobile titles, patent rights, musical royalties, and all other things that fall under the heading of property, but are not real property. So, typically the typical language is all that tract or parcel of land lying and being in, ta-da, wherever it is, city, county, state. The description, there's a lot on this. There's a lot more in the material. I don't want to go through all of it. You just need to start with the point of commencement or the point of beginning, and then you follow what we've taught about, describing the monuments, the bearings and distances, calling things like Hicksville Road right away or the north line of land lot 99. That's fine. We'll go over this more in the examples. And the same thing applies from getting from the point of commencement to the point of beginning as it does getting around the property. So, properly establishing the point of beginning does not in itself legitimize or validate the rest of the description. We have to get it all right. Arcs. This throws a lot of people off. You know what an arc is? It's a portion of a circle. That's all. I've got a diagram here of a typical little 66-foot long arc. Here's the components. The chord going from right to left, or counterclockwise, is 84, 32, 45 bearing at 65.99 feet. Here's the radius. This is a depiction of what an arc looks like. An arc can be part of your journey. This is how you describe it. Here, if you're going, around the property, you've come around and now you're going this way. You'll say fence along the southern 80-foot wide right-of-way of Mitchell Bridge Road with a curve to the left. So the left, and if you're coming this way and now the curve breaks, you're either going to be left or right of that point ahead. So if you're coming this way, off, from behind, and you're going, in this western direction, a curve in this direction would be a curve to the right, but in this example, we're a curve to the left. Because you're always on that journey, just like a road trip. You're looking down the road. You're looking in front of you. If it's to the left, it's to the left. If it breaks to the right, it curves to the right. It's really that simple. Footnotes. Once you've gone around the property and got back to the point of beginning, it's a summary. You say, okay, we've made our journey. We made it back home. This road trip was 482 miles. We covered 9 states and stopped at 3 state museums or whatever. But no, we're not talking about a road trip. Actually, we're talking about a property description. So it'll usually start with something like, said property contains so many acres, more or less. We always put more or less in because area is the lowest hierarchy of boundary control. So lawyers have always shied away from certifying acreage. Title insurers will not insure acreage. So the surveyor doesn't want to stick his neck out too far, nor does the legal description. Well, we have to certify our calculations. We don't put plus or minus on our plats, but on our legal descriptions, it'll usually say more or less. And omitting the acreage has little to no effect on a legal description. I mean, if it doesn't have an acreage in it, it does not invalidate it. So some general guidelines and recommendations. I like to make point of beginning and point of commencement all caps and bold, and you'll see that in your examples. Traverse the boundary in a clockwise direction. Don't be so technical that a layperson has a hard time understanding it. We're primarily writing this for the next surveyor who comes along to be able to follow us, but attorneys and property owners and loan originators and appraisers are going to be reading this too. So don't make it so fancy and so technical that people can't use it. When you're going back on an outdated, blown, or altered point of beginning or point of commencement, be sure to use understandable language. Okay? If that road intersection has been realigned and it don't exist anymore, and now our measurement is 38 feet difference, if you don't explain why in the legal description, everybody looking at it from the time you send it to the attorney to everybody else down the chain of title, if the attorney doesn't blow a fuse, is going to wonder, oh my gosh, why are we 38 feet wrong? We've got a 38-foot dispute. Our property's 38 feet in the wrong place. Oh my gosh. So if you can't stick with the record tie, explain why. Spell out words and avoid abbreviations. So for example, in OTP on a plat, if you look at the legend, it's going to say open top pipe. Your legal description should say open top pipe. It should not say OTP. Think about it. It's like you're in a conversation. You don't say, oh, then you go down the road till you find that OTP. Property owner, layperson would be a what? Oh, an open top pipe. Oh, okay. So just get that right to begin with. One little difference is cardinal directions. We abbreviate north, east, west, and south with those letters. Now, this I really want to stress as y'all go into drafting descriptions. This is for your own ease and understanding. This is not some big doctrinal legal theory. Symbols are acceptable in measurements for feet, inches, or for feet, minutes, and seconds. So, single apostrophe is for minutes and for feet. Double quotation marks, or 2 apostrophes if you want to do it that way, are okay for the seconds of a bearing. Now, for the degrees of a bearing, especially for your assignment, it's acceptable to spell out the word degrees. I saw that a lot. Most typewriters back in the day did not have a symbol for degrees on them. But I use the degree symbol. So the degree symbol can usually be chosen from available symbols in the symbol menu of Word document or WordPerfect or whatever word processing program you might be using. Or in most of them, if you hold down the Alt key and go 0176, the degree symbol will pop up. So this would look like, this is right here is what it would look like. North 37, obviously right here's the degree sign. Y'all know what it is. Lastly, call out monuments as found or set and describe them as fully as possible. If the plat calls for a nail set at the base of a 1/2-inch rebar found at a fence corner, don't simply describe it as a rebar or an iron pin found or a 1/2-inch rebar. Call it a 1/2-inch or a nail set at the base of a 1/2-inch rebar found at a fence corner. We're trying to make it describable that people can find it. The next surveyor can find it, the property owner can wander out there and find it. We'll sidestep a minute. You just need to be aware. We're not going to cover this, I'm going to go into great depth, but you need to be exposed to this, that 99.9% of all the legal descriptions that I've ever saw that you'll ever prepare are for the real property and fee simple blah. Even if it's an easement, it's still just right there, property on the face of the earth blah. That property in theory extends to a point in the center of the earth and projects into the heavens along our boundaries, projected from that point in the middle of the earth. Now, in the U.S., we have laws that says that we really only control so far above our ground level, and then it's the FAA's responsibility and domain. So you can't charge an airplane that flies over your property with trespassing. He's really not trespassing under the U.S. federal law system. Property, though, can be conveyed not just in 2 dimensions, like we look at on a plat, a survey, a map, a legal description. It can be conveyed in 3 dimensions. So there's a couple of examples. Somewhere in, I believe it's in New York City, there's an old church, had a high rise on either side. They connected the high rise over the church. The church was left alone. The high rise people owned the high rise above the church. How is that possible? The church sold the property, all of their property, citing their legal description, lying above an elevation of 104.5 mean sea level. So they sold basically their air rights. There are other cases to where people either retain when they sell or obtain by purchase air rights like that. So maybe instead of wanting to build a high rise that spanned over a church, there was a house over there or an office building, and they're building a high rise that they really want that nice view of the Buckhead skyline, and they didn't want anybody building another high rise right there next to them. So they just bought all the property interest above a certain elevation. So if they build up higher, they can build so high, and then they can stop. After that, they're trespassing on the next, on the person that bought the air rights. That's generally called air rights. Similarly, you can do subsurface. You can do so many feet below mean sea level. Or if mean sea level is 1,000 feet at the ground, you're going 400 feet down, you're at elevation 600. So you can use mean sea level until you get into negative areas like low-lying areas, coastal areas. But you might sell all of the land under your property at everything lying below an elevation of 600 for mining coal or kaolin or rare earth materials or whatever. You keep all the property from 600 feet mean sea level, 400 feet in the ground, all the way up to your house, your yard, and up into the air, and everything's fine. You just sold off your subsurface rights. This same approach applies where multi-story buildings are actually, the units in those, the condominium units, are sold. How do you define those? And they're not always necessarily condominium units, but how do you define those? Well, it might just lay out the metes and bounds description for that, where that unit is in that building. Even though this unit's 13 floors up at Atlantic Station. And it'll say all the property within the metes and bounds described above, which lie between the elevations of 942.7 and 954.8 North American vertical datum of 1988. That's the mean sea level. And so similar to the projections used in state plane coordinates, the datum of elevations is equally important. But this is how you basically just define the shape of that unit. But now look at it in 3 dimensions. Below 942.7, they don't own anything. That's the floor below them. Above 954.8, they don't own anything. That's all the floors above them. So they just own that footprint of their unit as it lies within that floor of the building defined by these elevations. Defining by elevations is about the only way you can do it. You'll also run across people asking or talking about short form legal descriptions. Simply put, this is a reference to a plat. If the plat's been recorded and you're preparing a legal description from it, include it anyway. The meets and bounds description is an integral part of our profession. A lot of people who use surveys and deal with property transactions live and die by legal descriptions. There are court cases and legal doctrine that imply that the description is just sanctuous, it's just the salt of the earth, you got to have it. But in most states, and in Georgia, we can use a short form legal description. Instead of getting into a title, a caption, a description, and a footnote, it can simply say, all that piece of property being 19.37 acres more or less, as shown on the boundary survey by Chastain and Associates PC, dated October the 23rd, 2024, recorded in Plat Book 84, page 265. Why is that adequate? 2 reasons. Number one, practicality, you don't need legal descriptions. You don't lose anything in translation. It's there. The survey is the legal description. You know, there's no reversed calls in theory if the survey's done right. There's no, wish we'd known what he found along that line. We're finding some old hack trees over here and we're finding some fence over there. Well, if you're looking at the plat, it should show that. The plat is a better description on its own for a surveyor or a property owner in many cases than a written description, in my opinion. A style or a recorded plat doesn't suffer from stylistic differences or things that are hard to understand, human errors like keying in the wrong thing, etc. The second reason is, in Georgia, the law says you can. Right here, OCGA 44-228 says, blah, 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 any deed, any document conveying an interest or a lien in real property, and refers to boundaries, meets, courses, or distances of the real property, delineated or shown on any plat of property, recorded, blah, 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 it shall be adequate. That's what it says. Closing comments. The meets and bounds legal description is a translation. It's a translation of a graphic image, the survey plat, into a written document. This is similar to translating a book or a paragraph or an essay or whatever from English to German. Part of the utility and purpose of a legal description is to be able to translate it back to a graphic form. We've done that already in this class. So even if some things are lost in translation, a good legal description is supposed to be able to replace the plat that it is drawn from. That is all for this lecture. We will go into some examples in a separate video that hopefully gets you started on this module's assignment. Thank you.